We are back on MorningLine. Thanks for joining us. Nick Barris here, along with Vanderbilt Professor Thomas Schwartz, taking your phone calls, 737-7587. If you want to talk presidential politics, some of what's happening in D.C., we're covering under a broad umbrella this morning. So if you've been observing and want to share a thought, join us. We'll go next to Jack. Jack, good morning. Hi, Jack.
Good morning.
Hey, what's on your mind?
Well, I want to start out by saying I'm an independent.
Okay.
So all of my comments are by definition nonpartisan.
Okay.
And I would argue that the rule of law is in jeopardy internationally and nationally because of the behavior of our president. Anybody who actually bothered to read the Mueller report saw that there were at least a half dozen counts of obstruction of justice where the full criteria for indictment were met. And if you go and read the U.S. Criminal Code, you will discover that attempting to obstruct justice is the crime in and of itself. You don't have to succeed. The people that you order to obstruct don't have to actually do the deed. If you order them or try to influence them to obstruct, they have obstructed justice. That's why Judge Napolitano on Fox News came out and said, no, General Barr, you're wrong on the law. In fact, he obstructed justice. That's domestically. And number two, on the international stage, in Venezuela, whether you like Maduro, which I don't, he was elected by his people. We unilaterally decided the election was invalid. Guaido did not even run for president. We chose him to be the president. On to Iran. Iran was in full compliance with the treaty that we all signed. Our president said, no, we don't care. It's a bad treaty. We're backing out. The Europeans, the Chinese, the Russians, everybody else said, including our own intelligence services, pretty much anybody who was looking at the situation said they are in compliance. Now he's sailing a carrier group based on intelligence from Israel that they might attack us. That, I would argue, that intelligence probably came from the same place that this certain knowledge of where the weapons of mass destruction are in Iraq.
Right.
So, at all levels, domestically, internationally, our president is a threat to the peace and security of our country. And I might add, both the Europeans and others have set up alternative trading systems to get around the U.S. Central Bank so that they can trade with Iran. That is a threat to the dollar being the world's reserve currency. If you know anything about economics, if the dollar ceases to be the world's reserve currency, we are in extremely deep trouble. We're going to end up in this country in a depression. So this reckless behavior by this guy, who some people seem to think is a saint and sticks to him like glue, the people that are continuing to support him in the face of this reckless behavior for our country and for the world, and I didn't even mention the environment, they are the problem. So folks, if you're a dyed-in-the-wool Trump supporter, step back, take a deep breath, look at the behavior, and think through what's best for our country.
Hey, Jack,
it's a serious problem.
Listen, well said. Yeah, you may agree with him, you may not agree with him, but I think, this is a man who's taken time to at least pay attention. Whether you want to believe the fact that he's independent, I believe him. He talked about, Fox and others, but I think his observations in a lot of that are dead on. And it's what gets me about any electorate that just, it's almost like, well, I elected him and I don't care what he does, I'm going to stand behind him. It's like it's your child. Some people, they have children that are just a mess, but they don't care. Of course you're going to still love them, but they just make excuses for them, and no matter what. And that's an intelligent guy who just called in. You may not agree with him, but there's no question Jack is intelligent, okay? And lucid, and he pays attention. And I don't see a lot of that in some of the dyed-in-wool Trump supporters.
I think I'd agree with you in part on that. The only thing I'd take issue with you is that you could make a case on some of the specifics there. For example, on Venezuela, Jack's right. Maduro was elected, but there was a fraudulent election. That was one of the reasons. So that's why the U.S. and on Venezuela, the U.S. has cooperation from Europe and other countries. So it's not quite as dramatic an action of the U.S. in Venezuela as he portrayed it. On Iran, it is complicated by the fact that the treaty that President Obama negotiated never was approved by the U.S. Senate. It was an executive agreement. It was very unpopular. Yes, other countries approved it, but it was the United States that's particularly at stake, or is particularly concerned about Iran's actions in supporting terrorism in the region, and is concerned that Iran did use the money that they were getting from the Iran nuclear deal to finance Hezbollah and other groups in the region. So it's messier. And then I'm not a Trump supporter, I'm an independent as well, but if I wanted to make the case, I'd say, look, you might dislike his behavior, you might dislike the way he behaves, but look at the economy. It is on a full steam. We have more than 3% growth, lowest unemployment since 1969. Results matter.
Well, and you're right. People vote their pocketbooks. They always have, in the face of everything else going on. That's really number one when it comes down to it. Now, who gets the credit for that can be open for debate. But on the other hand, can you give me some thoughts on what you think has driven this economic growth, and maybe where the president deserves some credit for that? Yeah, because you're right. I mean, the economy on a lot of fronts is going quite well.
Well, I think the president, where the president deserves credit, and this could also backfire, is loosening up regulations from Washington. This is, of course, a standard element. A lot of businesses have the feeling that they're not going to be as seriously policed by regulators in Washington.
Which hurts the environment on a lot of fronts.
Which can hurt the environment, can have effects if there's a scandal, a breakdown of some sort, as there was in the housing industry in the 2000s. I mean, there can be bad consequences from loosening regulation as well. But I think to the extent that growth has gone in the direction it has, it's partly this willingness of this administration not to be as seriously regulating the economy.
Right. Okay, so clearly I don't have to be an economist to know exactly what I can do. If you want to throw all in and say, I'm going to do everything to make it just a perfect environment for business to grow. Okay, if you do that, it's going to improve the economy, but there are negatives.
Yes.
That's the thing. See, I think that, this president maybe on that front is like knowing, and again, clever like a fox maybe, get those, who cares if all of a sudden pollutants are everywhere and there's other issues? The bottom line is people are living in the moment and they'll vote because the economy is going better. Meanwhile, to heck with what happens with future generations, which in my opinion, is not a good approach. And if you just don't want to believe in global warming or something like that, you're an idiot. So I don't know. That's a tough call for me on that. But you're right. The bottom line is that the economy is going well, and that's if that sustains. Do you suspect that'll carry him into 2020?
I don't know, because the caller made a lot of good observations that Trump has a recklessness about him. Reckless, for example, on this new threat toward China of higher tariffs. I mean, that could affect business confidence as well if there's a trade war.
I thought those tariffs were going to injure, and I've heard some reports that maybe it hurts some farmers, but I haven't seen a huge negative. It certainly hasn't hurt the economy much, and it seems like it's squeezing China more than us. But the tariffs that the president's put in place don't seem to have hurt us too much domestically.
That is probably, it has hurt certain people.
Certain people, maybe that we don't see as much. I don't know. I thought it might possibly, there were, if he does this, it's really going to cause problems. I haven't seen it.
Well, see, this is the argument of the president's supporters. Look, he's done things. He's actually taken on China. The thing is, of course, he's threatening now to double those or extreme.
And that's gotten their attention. But and a lot of on that with the president, I'm trying to see. Except for the folks that worried the tariffs would hurt them, I agree with the president that it always has seemed as though China has had that weighted in their favor.
Right.
And I don't know why past presidents maybe tolerated it to some degree, but this one's like. This, if anything, say what you will about Donald Trump. I mean, he's a businessman. How successful, I don't know, because we'll talk about his taxes in a moment. But, I mean, he's done well financially. He knows business, whether it works well for him all the time. And he sees there have been lousy deals where China's been taking advantage of us for decades. And he said that ends now. And I think a lot of people agree with that.
Yeah, the China thing was complicated because I think people thought that if China developed economically, it would become more democratic. It would become more liberal. It would become a more reasonable stakeholder. Instead, it's become more authoritarian. It's done things economically like steal intellectual property and behave in bad ways toward businesses in a sense that it has not played by the rules, and that's, I think, where Trump has gained some support in countering them.
I'm all for it. Hammer him, okay? I mean, what about his taxes then? So we still know that Mnuchin has decided, not to release them.
Those.
And yet the New York Times, had an article I don't know, did they get hold of some information? How do you think they got details where they're claiming that, how much losses he had over the years?
Well, those were older records, and it is possible that people who worked for Trump or who were involved in that were willing to leak some of that stuff, who had access. Remember, these are from the 80s and early 90s, so these are 30 years, more than 30 years on some of them. So it is possible that those people leaked it, and that during the 80s, I don't think this was as big a secret. People knew that Donald Trump had both successes and great failures during that time. So, but it is
Atlantic
at the
City
scale.
Casino and stuff like this. He had failures, and again, if I'm the president, that's what it's always kind of made me wonder. What is it that he doesn't want so much out there? I mean, he's had plenty of negative things, some of which were true, said about him, and it hasn't really hurt him politically. And so how bad can it be, whatever comes out? If it comes out that his tax returns show that he lost a bunch of money, I don't think, a lot of people lose money. I don't think that's a big deal. What do you think could be in there that maybe in his mind, unless he just wants to play hardball and say, look, I don't want you to have it, you can't have it. I'm just going to say that. But is there something in there he doesn't want us to see?
Well, there's a set of arguments. One is that simply that he's never been as rich as he's always claimed to be. I mean, that's
okay, but even if that were true, who cares?
I agree with you on that. I think that at this point it may be simply stonewalling and just saying I'm not going to give it to you. But he didn't release his returns during the campaign, and there may have been embarrassing information about money loans and the lack of paying taxes. That you might remember that in 2012 the Senate Majority Leader accused Mitt Romney of not paying any taxes, which turned out to be false. But that accusation was designed to hurt Romney, and probably did in that election. So maybe Trump at least had that sense that might be the case. Nowadays we don't.
And you wouldn't pay taxes in some cases. You think, how on earth does Donald Trump not? If he can put down enough losses.
Right.
And so if you have a lot of losses, if there's one positive in losses, you may be finding ways where you don't have to pay taxes on whatever it is you have in place there. All right. So, well, I think that I don't know that they're ever going to get the tax returns. The House of Representatives wants it. Mnuchin says he's not going to give it to them because he says he doesn't see a true legislative reason to give that to them. And is there any more they can do to try to
they can, they can bring him to court. They can, pursue it. The thing is, it's going to take a long time. So, in the end, they can make it into an issue and see whether people in 2020 are going to be moved by it. They weren't enough of them weren't moved by it in 2016. I don't know, unless they can build some case that there's things in the tax returns that might be connected more broadly to some of the other issues about the president.
Yeah. Well, listen, we'll go to a break, and then when we come back, final segment, we take a few more phone calls. I guess it was we were trying to go. I can't name them for you, and I don't think you can. You might be able to, but there were 17 Republican candidates running for president last time around, and of course, President Donald Trump is the one who emerged from that pack. Among the Democrats now, lining up to run for 2020 and are already in the race, 22. I think is the count. Don't even ask me to go through but 22 now, and one of them will emerge, and I suspect there may even be more throwing their names into the hat. The latest, of course, Joe Biden and how that plays out. In fact, I just saw a notice come out here that Joe Biden is coming to Nashville, and of course, Tennessee is a very heavily Republican state, but you've got a Democrat person coming here, so we'll get into that and how the presidential race is shaping up right after this.